Hello everyone. On behalf of the Panasonic Foundation and the Consortium for School Networking, we welcome you to an important conversation, around how to plan your end game in building a vision for how technology can further enable a district's strategic work towards equity and academic excellence. I'm Ann Ware, and I serve as the COSIN Project Director for the collaborative work between the Panasonic Foundation and the Consortium for School Networking. Both of those groups provide leadership for collaboration for innovation. This is collaborative work among 15 school districts who are committed to breaking the links between poverty, race, and educational outcomes for all. And when we say all means all. We call this work collaboration for innovation. Also joining us today is Scott Thompson. Scott serves as the Assistant Executive Director of the Panasonic Foundation, and Scott will be bringing us a welcome today. Scott?
Good afternoon. We had an outstanding Google Hangout with folks from the Hillsborough School District several months back, and in fact, it was so terrific that we wanted more, and you'll have an opportunity to do that, to hear more this afternoon, and we really appreciate that. So, on behalf of Panasonic Foundation, let me express my appreciation to Jordan and Joel for the insights they will be offering, and to Ann and Marcy for the essential roles they're playing. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And Scott will be with us throughout our Hangout today, and potentially we'll have some questions and thoughts about, again, planning for this end game. Our presenters today have experience that's mirrored in our topic today. Supporting the goal of equity and academic excellence. Dr. Jordan Schiff is the Superintendent of Schools for the Hillsborough Township of Public Schools in New Jersey, and his associate, Joel Handler, is the Director of Technology for Hillsborough. During our conversation today, those of you that are with us through Google Hangout on air, we look forward to your comments and your questions, and Joel and Dr. Schiff are okay with really hard questions too, but we invite you to pose those in the chat area of the Google Hangout on air. So that we can begin thinking about questions that you might have and you might want to join this conversation. What I'd like to do is just quickly begin to highlight this conversation around building and planning for this end game for equity. When we think about the term end game, sometimes I think about chess, and there's lots of moving parts in a chess game to get to the end goal of winning, if you will. And so you'll be hearing about lots of those moving parts today. One that you'll hear about is what's the role of the superintendent in helping to build that vision for how technology can further or be one of the parts of a district's strategic work towards building equity. We'll also hear how Hillsborough has gone about building a coalition around this work, around technology fostering equity with stakeholders. And so we'll hear about how they're working with board members and district office staff, principals, teachers, and we'll also hear how students have had a voice in this work. We'll hear directly from Joel about his role in providing leadership both on the programmatic and the technical end of putting these right pieces in place and how they're being planned for. The students' role, we mentioned again, what's their role in this decision-making process? And that's one, all of these are very important, and that's one becoming even more and more important as we talk to districts that have like goals that they want to meet. And then last, but just as important as each of the other four, is how do we go about building school-level leadership with principals? We know that our principals and assistant principals are the leaders that are closest to where teachers and students and parents are working on a daily basis, and how do we go about providing them support, providing them professional learning that supports this transformational change. And so those are the general topics that we will talk with today. As I serve as your moderator, I'll be teeing up these conversations with Dr. Schiff and with Joel Handler. So, Dr. Schiff, before we get started, I'm going to ask you just tell us a little bit about Hillsborough, and then we'll jump into these end game questions.
Sure, Ann. Thank you for having us as part of this conversation and dialogue. Something so important, excellence and equity is something that we've been focusing on for quite some time. Give you a little background about Hillsborough Township Public Schools. We are a pre-K through 12th grade public school system. We have 9 schools, 6 elementary, one 5-6 intermediate school, a 7-8 middle school, and a 9-12 high school. We have over 7,200 kids in our district, about 1,000 employees with an annual budget of close to $115 million. We're in a suburban community. Our students are perform very well relative to their peer group as well as to the state average on all of the typical type of metrics that you would think about when you're thinking of evaluating student performance. In terms of diversity, we have about 7% of our kids are African American, another 7% are Hispanic, about 14% are Asian, and the rest are white. Our children on free and reduced lunch is, on average, is about 7%, but we have some schools that are close to 15 to 18% that are children that are near or slightly above the poverty level.
Thank you, Dr. Schiff. So let's jump into this conversation and start with what you feel like the superintendent's role is in building this vision for how technology can help to further enable equity and excellence. We know the superintendent has lots and lots of different things are all up in the air at the same time, and really thrilled to hear more about how you have helped to further enable this conversation with your district leaders, with school leaders, and with your stakeholders. So what's your role in building that vision?
Well, I think first and foremost, the superintendent in any district plays a very important role of setting the broader strategic vision of the district and working with stakeholders, board members, staff members, other community members, and students. If you can get the buy-in, then we can reallocate resources in order to support any type of technology initiative. My concern when I first came to Hillsborough was that we were not a district that prioritized technology, but there was great interest in it. We have, and sitting to my right is our Director of Technology, who played an extraordinarily important role of taking us from a district where technology was viewed as something very separate and something very different from what it is viewed now, which is an essential tool that provides opportunity for all children, regardless of their background and experience, regardless of whether they have connectivity at home or they don't, regardless of whether they have technology at home or they don't. So when we were beginning our conversations about moving the district forward in technology, my voice, and again, I think this is important for any superintendent, that you have the opportunity to say resources can help these kids learn better, learn more, and it can help to close achievement gaps between and among different groups, in particular the traditionally underserved groups. So the board, to its credit, was open to those ideas, and we built this process through a strategic planning process where the board, who are the duly elected officials of the community, were able to say, yeah, this is something that we want to do and that we would like to see our district attain within the next 5 years. So it wasn't just an initial commitment, it was a multi-year commitment that had to reallocate resources, that had to invest in training and people and hardware and software and infrastructure. And by planning it out very well, again with a large group of talented administrators and teachers, we were able to slowly begin the process of piloting it, trying it out in different classes, evaluating lessons learned over that 4-year period of time, until we finally went to full implementation. And Joel and I talk about this as This is the start of the process. This is not the end of a process.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear that you have elected officials that understand or seem to understand today's learner, and what are some of the tools that they will need to be somewhat proficient at as they move on to be citizens there in Hillsborough. Okay, so let's shift a little bit about building that coalition. That's a huge topic that we often hear from district level staff is, how do we go about having welcoming conversations but being okay to ask the hard questions around how do we get to where we want to be. We all probably are aware that you can't print your own money there in Hillsborough, and so sometimes when it gets down to just the money part, that can be really, really struggling. So how did you go about that process of beginning to build a coalition, and kind of where is that coalition today?
Well, when I was hired 4 years ago, there was interest in my background in bringing technology into districts. So I think the board had an aspiration to do more in this particular area. But it was very clear when I came on board that we had a lot of work to do in that particular area, and that the investments just weren't there. So there were the foundation of the policymakers already wanted to do something different. They weren't sure what they wanted to do, but they wanted to be acknowledged as a district that had excellence in some of its areas. Now, Hillsborough had been and continues to be a center of excellence for special education. Our student achievement has and continues to be high. We do some very important work with staff development and have continued to do so over the years. But now we're starting to look at being recognized at the regional level, at the state level, and even nationally as a district that's doing some extraordinary things in technology. So I think that they wanted to get there. They really weren't sure where the there was. And I'm not sure that I brought clarity to a vision. I think what I brought was an idea of a process to get us to a place where we could look back 5 years from now and say, boy, we've come far. But it was always about this idea that technology can enrich the learning environment in a way that other tools can't. We also had very important conversations about whether or not we wanted to be a district that was a bring your own device district, where students would come to the district with their own computers, which was a much, much less expensive option than what we were considering, or that we would purchase for our kids the same devices. And we decided that maybe year 2 or year 3, somewhere around that period of time. It wasn't initially that we were going to do it that way. But based upon this idea that some of our kids could easily afford the technology, while some it would be a significant challenge, that's where we started to have conversations about equity. What did we really want to be able to do? Not only closing the achievement gap, but we wanted to close the digital divide between those children that had a lot of access to technology and some kids that had very little access to technology. We also saw it as an equity issue with training, that we wanted to be able to standardize the training. We also were able to standardize certain expectations, and that any type of instructional work that was done was kind of device agnostic. It didn't matter what the device was. What mattered more was the activity that enriched the instruction. And we weren't going to be able to do that easily unless everyone had a similar thing. So there was lots of conversation, about that.
So one of the things that we did find was, as we looked at the idea of BYOD versus having a uniform platform, as we worked with teachers, and we had initially on we had a BYOD program simultaneously going on while we did these pilots. And what we saw was the classes that students were bringing in their technology, it was never reliable in the sense that the teacher could say, hey, my entire class could do this. Because depending on the device the student had, and if the student even had a device, it kind of limited things. So the teacher really would go down to the bare bones baseline, because that's all they can reliably say. Hey, today in my lesson, I know I can do this because every student has access to the internet. But I can't necessarily do this site because, well, it may require certain technologies that student A's device doesn't have. And student B might only be using a cell phone, a smartphone, and they're very limited. And student C might have, a top-of-the-line laptop. Well, they could do almost anything. So it really became very limiting in that the teacher, because they couldn't rely on knowing that all their students had a commonality, they always went to the lowest common denominator, which was, well, they can look something up on the internet. And one of the things that we were very important about was, or strong on, was we didn't want it to just be just a resource. We didn't want it to just be a big encyclopedia that you can look things up. We wanted to actually use the power of the internet to really transform learning and take it to a different level. So as we compared BYOD versus this idea of every student having the same device provided by the district, educationally we really saw that as the right way to go.
We also were concerned that we didn't want to be a district that had kids just accessing the internet or surfing the web and doing more typing in classes. We saw this as an opportunity to transform fundamentally instructional practices, and that the technology was an impetus to do that. Was a catalyst to make some more substantive changes. And we're actually beginning to see that change even in year one of full implementation. And one of the things that we learned through the pilot process was that about after 4 to 6 months, we start seeing routines begin to change, planning begin to change, expectations begin to change, routines change, and then teachers start to become more connected and sophisticated users of technology. One of the other things that we're using pretty consistently is a platform where the teacher can actually see what's going on every single kid's computer. They can push out information en masse to their students, collect things very simply through the computer. So we're becoming more of an efficient district as well in terms of delivery of materials, receiving materials, and we're looking at continuing that process to analyze student achievement data using the technology more effectively, and continuing to enhance and enrich the instructional environment.
Okay.
I do want to say one other thing, in, if I could. Where Joel is leading a pretty large task force at looking at this idea of having virtual learning occur. So as we saw during last winter in Hillsborough, New Jersey, we actually had to close school almost 10 days last year. And we're interested in seeing, can we provide high-quality instructional experiences to kids who may not be in the same place at the same time, kind of breaking down the walls of the school and allowing for virtual learning of a high caliber to achieve in a large school system like ours. And we're also seeing ancillary benefits to this for children that are receiving home instruction, that may be receiving chemotherapy and are immunosuppressed so they can't come into school, kids that for other reasons are not able to attend school, and rather than have home instruction, have the actual rich type of experience that you have in a classroom when they're not physically present in the classroom.
And what's interesting is kind of almost the flip to that as well, is when teachers aren't in the classroom, we've seen areas where they're actually reaching back into the classroom during instructional time and either communicating with their students. We've had one teacher who was actually out for a day, and she actually used Google Hangout to come into the classroom and give instruction to the students while they were there with their devices. And she was running a service where she actually had a presentation she was running from home, and students were actually following that presentation on their devices. They were answering questions, which that data was then coming back to her while she was not in school that day. She was home sick. We've also seen where, actually it was kind of funny, when we had our first meeting where we were talking about this idea of virtual learning, we actually had some teachers there who were working with students, checking in every now and then, kind of just monitoring what they were doing, providing them feedback while those students were back in class, while the teacher was not able to be in class because she was attending that session. So we had several teachers doing that. We thought that was kind of ironic, so we're very funny that, you know, here you are, you're learning about virtual learning, and actually you're kind of doing it while you're here discussing it.
It's really breaking down a paradigm of what is teaching and learning in the classroom.
Yeah.
But getting back to the whole issue of equity and how we can provide experiences, especially for underserved minority populations, this gives us freedoms that we haven't had before. That kids that are being disciplined and aren't able to attend schools can still have some level of quality instruction. That kids that can't be in schools for health reasons can have that quality instruction. And regardless of whether you live in a wealthy community in Hillsborough or a poorer community in Hillsborough, you have the same access regardless. And we're continuing to monitor whether or not our technology initiative improves performance, period, but also looks at these disaggregated groups and see, are we continuing to close those achievement gaps?
Sure. So, with respect to the teachers, especially the teacher that was sick, dedication comes to the top. You know, again, from very good teachers, it just oozes from their skin. It's what they do. So let's talk. So those people that are with us today, I'm sure there are some that'll go, well, let's really talk about what each child has in regards to this equity piece. And I know that you've done some pilots and that you're in this first year full implementation. So if you could speak just to, does every child have a device? Are they taking them home? A little bit around the logistics of actually what students have, who has them, and where they have them, and when they have them. Does that kind of make sense?
Sure, absolutely.
So in our grades K through 4, every student in grades K through 4 has a Nexus 7 tablet that's kept in the classroom. Each one has an individual device, so they're stored in carts. Students will use them throughout the day. They'll bring them with them to their specials. They will, depending on the classes, especially when you get up to 3rd and 4th grade, it's very interesting watching those classes. Students will just kind of get up and get their device as they need it, and using it in different centers, in different educational areas. There are times where they'll do whole group instruction where they have them. Other times they're using them, depending on what activities they're doing, they'll be using them. So every student in grades K through 4 has a Nexus tablet in the room. We also have carts of Chromebooks at the elementary school that are shared. So in our 3rd and 4th grade, there's about a 1 to every 3 students. There's a Chromebook that are stored in the 3rd and 4th grade classrooms. And then in the lower grades, there's 1 or 2 carts that's shared around the building. So, and they'll use them more for when they're actually getting into typing. Certain things that don't run on the Nexus tablet per se, they'll need the Chromebook for. So that's what we have in our K4 space. In 5 through 12, every student has a Chromebook. We use the Acer touchscreen Chromebooks, particularly as the ones we went with. We were very heavily invested in this concept of using touch because of the students being able to manipulate and draw, and just using that tactile interface has really helped. So every student in grades 5 through 12 has a Chromebook that they do bring home to and from school with them. This is our first year where every student has one. To talk a little bit the history, we've been doing this, like Dr. Schiff said, the past several years. 4 years ago, or 3 years ago actually, we started with a very small pilot using just tablets with about 80 students. Then 2 years ago, we grew that pilot to 10% of our students in grades 5 through 12, where some had tablets and some had Chromebooks. At the end of that year, we found the Chromebook really was the right model for us, especially in 5 through 12. We really felt that having the laptop model where students can actually type and multitask easily really played well to the educational environment. So then last school year, we went from finding the right device and the right environment to, can we scale this? How do we get to a larger environment? So we went to 20% of our students, every one of them having Chromebooks in grades 5 through 12. And then that led us to this year where we went full implementation, all students in grades 5 through 12 having the same device across the board.
Wow, that's fantastic and really speaks to each and every child having access to the same resources, which is sometimes hard for school systems to do for all the reasons that we know about. So Joel, that kind of shifts us into this role of the technology leader, and you are such an educational leader, about working about how to get all the right pieces in place, that whole chess game, lots of moving parts, if you will. And for those of us that have that check out CoSN Web soon, Joel, we have already done some Hangouts where Joel gets really further into the use of Google and what they're doing with Google, and so those will be posted at CoSN Web. So if you would, Joel, share with us a little bit around getting these right pieces in place through what you've learned through the pilots, with regards to maybe the logistics and the technical end of things.
Sure. So to talk a little about the logistics, technical end of some of these things, well, we really kind of built a lot around the Google Foundation, and we've been using Google Apps since about 2009, where it was introduced. It was kind of out there. It wasn't really pushed on teachers or students. It was kind of introduced as a back-end thing where, hey, this is a great tool that you can collaborate with. Because it really was the collaboration that kind of clued us into it and said, this is a great tool for education, was this fact that students can collaborate, can work in real time, or even in not real time, in an asynchronous mechanism, but they can work together. And that really is what kind of latched us into this concept. And one of our large technology goals is all around collaboration and students being able to collaborate and work on digital content. So that kind of was a foundation for what was driving us in terms of using the Google ecosystem. As we started looking at different devices, we looked at a lot of the key players out there. We looked at different Nexus tablets going way back when. We looked at iPads. We looked at other platforms as well, Windows laptops, Mac laptops. We looked at all of them and to see what worked. And what was nice was the Google platform really kind of works across all of them. But one of the things as we did the pilots, we started to look at what is the impact the device has on education? How easy is it? Because as we started looking at the different pilots, we said, and just looking at technology in general, teachers and students are not necessarily all techies, right? There's a few of us who are like, hey, you give me the latest gadget and I'll dive into it, I'll love it, I'll really play with it. Most people want to use technology to really do whatever they're doing better. So that's the goal of technology. It's supposed to be a tool to help you achieve some sort of goal. So when the tool gets too complicated, it doesn't get used. It doesn't get used effectively. And what we had seen, and Dr. Schiff alluded to this, when he came into the district, we had technology around, but technology was this special thing. It was like, you can go to the lab and do this special thing, when the lab was available and when you had this real need for it. But otherwise, we don't use technology. It was kind of, hey, it's there when we need it for this special thing. But for everyday learning and achieving our tasks, it really wasn't that. Where our goal was to get this culture of technology is part of what we do, is how we do it. Just like in the real world, most people don't get excited about using technology. Like right now we're doing this Hangout. Hangouts, in the business world aren't this like, wow, let's have this face-to-face conversation across the world. It's kind of like, hey, let's just do it. And so, but in education, it's still seen as this wow factor. It's like, whoa, this is crazy. And so one of the things that we've done is by creating this platform across the board, making it equitably across all students, we've kind of gotten rid of the wow factor. And that's a good thing. It shouldn't be. It should just be kind of part of the norm. So as we rolled out the technology, we looked at that in the pilots, that what technology will work seamlessly, what will work easiest, what will have the least impact on student learning. And like any technology, it will fail at times. Things just stop working. And which technology tools can we implement that have the least impact or are the quickest to turn around and rectify and get working again properly? And so that kind of led us down the road to, hey, the Chromebook really had the least impact from our points of view on downtime. When a device stopped working, instead of trying to fix it, we give the student a loaner device. We say, hey, just use this, And within the time it takes for that student to report the issue, walk to maybe the media center to turn their device in and get another device and walk back to their classroom, that's the amount of educational loss that they have from something not working.
Sure.
Versus the other devices, we found, oh, here's a new device, but now it takes hours, potentially even days, till I'm fully immersed back in my educational environment, forgetting the fact that I had a broken device. I'm able to keep up with my peers. And so that was kind of what led us towards the Chromebook and the Chromebook direction, and the fact that the device really is just a portal to get us to my content, which is out in the web.
And I think it's important also to emphasize that we prepared our classrooms, we prepared the infrastructure, and we prepared our teachers for this move. So before all kids were part of the Google ecosystem, teachers were part of that ecosystem. Before all of our kids got one-to-one devices, we purchased laptops for all of our teachers. So they had that. We also invested in smart boards and in sound field systems in every single one of our classrooms and learning environments. So whatever the teacher wanted the kids to see or to hear, they could do so easily. So we were building that in year one. Even before we piloted, the teachers had their laptops and the classrooms had the infrastructure, had the furniture basically, to be able to project digital images and to amplify digital sound.
And piggybacking on that, we also included the wireless infrastructure was put in place really before we had the devices, as many devices as would need to be there to say, hey, why we have wireless everywhere? Because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a system where teachers can go, it works in that corner, but not that corner. Or if I go to this room, I can use it, but if I go to that room, I can't. Because once it becomes a default, something I have to think about, and it's not going to be used.
Yes, absolutely. I vividly remember that when I served in a similar role of which you are today. Vividly, those are things you don't forget. So let's shift our conversation a little bit to the student's role in this decision-making process. And Dr. Schiff, you and I had a great phone conversation back in 2014 where you shared some really exciting student stories about the things that they're discovering and the things that they're doing with the tools that you have given them. And then we'll move on to how we're providing support for building level leadership and for teachers. So tell us a little bit about how students are engaging in this work, and have they had some ability to say, here's what I think we should do as we're moving towards building this technology into the way teaching and learning takes place in Hillsborough. So let me turn over to both of you.
When we started our pilot, part of the information that we were going to use to determine our next steps were surveys that we gave to the students. We also observed students in classrooms and had conversations with them about how this technology is changing the way that thinking and learning is going on in classrooms. And, a quick anecdote. We wanted to involve our board in some of these conversations and have the board speak directly with students. And we did. It was 3 years ago. I remember we did a Google Hangout with a group of high school kids. We actually went into their classrooms. The board was here at the board conference room, and we had this Google Hangout with the high school Algebra 1 class, which was the Phase 1 group that was using the technology, to have a real-time conversation with them. It was 7:30 in the morning, and I don't think they said like 2 words. I mean, it kind of took the wind out of our sails because we were all excited about this. The kids, for the most part, this is the world that they live in. They don't, they see it as kind of a natural extension of what their world is already doing. When in my prior district, one of the students that I worked with said something to me that had a profound impact on me. And he said that when I go to school, I have to power down. And the idea was that I have lots of access to digital content to the internet, to all sorts of information that's out there. And I have to change my expectations when I come into a classroom environment. That's not what Hillsborough kids are saying now. You know, Hillsborough kids have all of this access. You know, the issues of organizational management, the fact that the kids are not, you know, putting backpacks on their backs with 70 pounds worth of textbooks any longer, that they have video access to one another very easily and simply, kind of changes that instructional environment. Quick anecdote. Last week, 3 students from a junior English class, English 3 class, interviewed me while I was at my desk through a Google Hangout to talk with me about whether or not computer science should be a graduation requirement. We had this very interesting conversation. It was part of a writing assignment that they had to complete, and it was seamless. They just, you know, we had this conversation. They were in their classroom with their Chromebook, the 3 of them sitting around one Chromebook, and me sitting in front of my computer, having this conversation, not a big deal, and I was so impressed with how smart and intelligent their questions were. And then I asked them at the end, you know, what do you think of this technology being used? And they talked to me about how it helps keep them organized a little bit more, how sometimes they don't like it and they would rather be writing down some things. They talked about how they like the video conferencing capability, how their teacher is changing the way that they're doing things in the classroom. So, you know, the dog can't eat your homework any longer when your homework is digital. You know, I guess it's lost through the dog that's in the internet that eats you.
Well, I hear often from many districts that are doing similar important work like yourselves around this student voice piece, and what they share with me, as much of what you just said, is that they don't think about it. It's part of their fabric, and they're more of the what's the big deal, you know. Right. They just move on, you know, with it, and it sounds like you're making great progress there. Okay, so let's shift to our last big topic for today around how you're providing professional learning, maybe to building level leadership, as they are the ones that are closest with the teachers in classrooms and students going up and down the hallways and students in the lunchroom area. How are you providing leadership and kind of building them up for success as they are the ones that are day-to-day with today's learners?
We made a priority for the staff development for our leadership to focus on technology this year. We, as a lot of other states in the country, are now focused on Common Core as well as park readiness. We have a third component, and that third component is technology integration. We have a 3-day workshop. 3 days worth of administrative and leadership workshops that are just specifically designed for our supervisors, principals, vice principals, and directors of the district. Joel and his team have led staff development in that area. We also take time out at each of our leadership team meetings, supervisor meetings, and principal meetings to just do a quickie staff development on technology. We're constantly putting it on the front burner. I also visit each school at least once a month, and I have a 2-hour meeting with each principal. And it is not uncommon that we are in classrooms looking at how technology is being integrated. And part of my job is to celebrate the great things that are going on that I see. One of the things that we did that I felt was critical this year is that our expectations for how teachers are using it are just to give it a try. That's it. Just give it a try. That there wouldn't be anything negative in anyone's evaluation unless they choose not to try. So we wanted, and this is what we learned through the pilots, that if we let our teachers go, trust that they are professionals, and provide them with good staff development, that we didn't need to be being on top of them and having very specific expectations. Our expectations is that they give it a shot. And that was very, very smart for the district because it took all the pressure off of the teacher.
Right.
And we gave them permission to fail, basically. At our, I do a formal presentation to welcome all teachers back, and I told them that some of their lessons with technology will absolutely fly, and some will fail miserably, and that is okay. That is the process of learning. That's the process of change, and this is going to be a year of learning. And that set the stage for not only our leaders but our teachers also to explore this transformational type of activity in a way that lowered the stress rather than ratchet up the stress.
And so some of the things that we've seen that really have kind of shown us that this is working is in a lot of the feedback that we get from teachers, especially during the pilot where we did a lot of close inspection on the classrooms that were involved, you would see this process where the teachers would start and they would start very, you know, I'll try something, you know, this week. We'll take out the device and try something this week. And then slowly the next week it was like, we'll try a couple things. Then the week after that, we'll try a little bit more. And then slowly became, oh, I'm going to let the students just use them for taking notes and stuff. And, you know, we're going to get somewhere. And then usually, and I think Dr. Schiff mentioned this before, but what we've seen pretty consistently is about 5 months into it, all of a sudden the teacher realizes, wait, this can do so much, and it has the capabilities of making learning different, more powerful, more applicable, streamlined, if you will, and be able to target students in different ways. And it's usually about that 5-month tipping point that all of a sudden a light bulb clicks, and the rooms become transformed. And what's interesting is a lot of these classrooms now, you'll see the room's setup is entirely different. The learning space is different. You'll see students sitting on the side of the room, students sitting on beanbag chairs, students sitting on desks, students sitting on heaters in the back corner, and they just have their devices and they're working as though you're like, is this a coffee shop or a classroom? I really can't tell the difference. And yet you go around and you look at what the students are doing and you realize they're really engaged. They're totally into what they're learning about. And it's very interesting. Not every classroom, not all the time, but it's really neat to see that kind of transformation that they don't think anything of it anymore. It's just kind of normal.
Well, Dr. Schiff and Joel, it's obvious, and I've been taking some notes here as we've been talking, that you truly have or are committed to closing that achievement gap for each child. And as we say in closing, in collaboration for innovation, all means all for every single child. And you mentioned, making sure that your underserved groups are served equitably and have an equitable chance at being successful academically. And it appears that you have gone through some very thoughtful work around building a coalition around this work, listening to your stakeholders, and understanding that, as you said, Dr. Schiff, sometimes it's just not going to go right. But as you continue to move forward and kids become more actively engaged and teachers become more actively engaged, that it is going to do exactly what you want it to do, and that is to help with your strategic work around providing equity and academic excellence for every child that you have and for the learners of tomorrow. So we want to thank you for the leadership that you are providing. For those that are listening today, Joel goes really deeply, more deeply into the professional learning model that they have. I know people may have questions about that in the future, and we'll continue to point them in that direction, because I would encourage any listener to really hear about how Hillsborough has gone about their professional learning with their teachers, because it is truly remarkable. But we thank you very much, and we wish you great success in your continued work of empowering every single child and every teacher that you have. Thanks so much.
Yes, many, many thanks.
Our pleasure.